Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaura Premanandi Hari Bol. So today we're continuing our study of the theory of knowledge. And I read everybody's homework. So there was Shivani's sister, Sunidhi. There was Sanmukh. There was Shrestha. There was... who else? Some others also. I read them all. And there's one thing that I'm going to go over some of these homeworks. There's one thing that Shrestha did some research, and she found a very nice quote from the teachings of of Lord Chaitanya, Chapter 23, page 251, in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And it says, knowledge is information gathered from the scriptures, and science is practical realization of that knowledge. This science is actually doing humble devotional service unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. So here is a very correct short explanation of what is real knowledge. And the whole exercise of studying the theory of knowledge should lead to this conclusion. And therefore, that's why the other day I had a little problem with the graph that Sanmukh found in a BTG. In fact, I still want to know what edition of BTG that is, and who wrote the article. However, there is another point of view also in the Srimad Bhagvatam, 1st Canto, 5th chapter. Srila Prabhupada writes, 5. Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 5th chapter, 30th verse, he writes, he says, the impersonalist who has no idea of the transcendental form of the Lord cannot understand this most confidential message of the Lord. The expression most confidential is significant here because knowledge of devotional service is far, far above knowledge of impersonal Brahman. Jnanam means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge. So I think whoever wrote that article, he got this definition of jnanam. This knowledge develops up to the knowledge of impersonal Brahman. Above this, when it is partially mixed with devotion, such knowledge develops to knowledge of Paramatma, or the all-pervading Godhead. This is more confidential. But when such knowledge is turned into pure devotional service, and the confidential part of transcendental knowledge is attained, it is called the most confidential knowledge. This most confidential knowledge was imparted by the Lord to Brahma, Arjuna, Uddhava, etc. So, what we're trying to do now, or what I want you to do, is to keep correcting or adding on to your theory of knowledge paper. This is like something like writing a PhD thesis. Not quite as elaborate, but it's a small version of a PhD thesis. Each of you has been, for the last 2-3 weeks, writing something about the theory of knowledge. But we want to make this into almost like a little booklet. Because if you don't understand what knowledge is, how can you pursue education? And that's the whole point. The theory of knowledge is absolutely essential to know. Otherwise, you could be easily misled by so-called education. So, jnana means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge. Okay. However, if we look at the quote from the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, chapter 23 on page 251, at least in the edition that Shrestha looked at, it says, knowledge is information gathered from the scriptures, and science is practical realization of that knowledge. So, is there what you would say a disconnect or a difference between jnana means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge? No. Jnana means ordinary knowledge would mean knowledge of the material world or any branch of knowledge. Okay. But there are, just like everything else, there are different levels of knowledge. So the Bhagavad Gita, or in the same purport, 1.5.30, Prabhupada says, there is confidential knowledge, there's also okay, there's 3 levels of knowledge. Let me see what he said. There's knowledge, there's confidential knowledge, and there's most confidential knowledge. So now we have 3 categories: knowledge, and confidential knowledge, and most confidential knowledge. So jnanam can be on these 3 levels. The best level is most confidential knowledge. So one of your homeworks now is to look up in the chapters Bhagavad Gita. Let me tell you where to look. You can start with chapter 9, verse number 2. Chapter 9 is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge. And verse number 2, it's a very long purport, and it's talking about Raja Vidya, the king of all knowledge. So, I want you to read this purport, this verse and purport, and okay, we'll continue after the opening of the deities. 1 minute. Go ahead. Okay. Hare Krishna, glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, we see, this is where the little bit of a confusion was the other day when I said that in that chart that Sanmukh found on the in the BTG, it said that jnanam means ordinary knowledge. But see, Prabhupada says ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge. So what is meant here is that ordinary knowledge means mundane knowledge, or where you're dealing with phenomena, whatever is perceived empirically with the senses. And he says here, this knowledge develops up to the knowledge of impersonal Brahman. So it is possible, just with mundane knowledge, to understand up to the point of impersonal Brahman. So that's why Mayavadis, who are always talking about Brahman, and then Buddhists, they're talking about nirvana, and then people that take LSD, they're talking about, they saw these colors and they saw this light, and then you have so many different types of bogus people, and let's call them incomplete, imperfect religions that think that the absolute state of realization is light or energy. So that's the limit that one can achieve with mundane knowledge based on empirical, based on what you can see with your imperfect eyes and what you can hear with your perfect and imperfect ears and so forth, and your imperfect measurements and so forth, that you end up becoming an impersonalist. And being an impersonalist, even if you do attain Brahman realization, as long as you don't accept that there is a Supreme Personality of Godhead who's a person, the Supreme Person, and his own abode, either Vaikuntha or Goloka Vrindavan, you'll fall down eventually from Brahman realization and start all over again speculating. So there are limits to mundane knowledge. That's the whole point. And therefore, there's knowledge, there's confidential knowledge, and there's most confidential knowledge. This is the way Bhagavad Gita presents the question of knowledge. So knowledge means it's based on whatever you can perceive or phenomena, things that you can see with your eyes or a telescope or a microscope or glasses, and then there's confidential knowledge. That's starting from the point where you begin devotional service. So there's Karma Mishra Bhakti, and there's Jnana Mishra Bhakti, and there's Yoga Mishra Bhakti. That is karma, jnana, or yoga mixed with some bhakti. So then you can develop some confidential knowledge because of the admixture of those things with bhakti. But above that, is most confidential knowledge. And most confidential knowledge, or Raja Vidya, the king of all knowledge, can only be attained by unalloyed devotional service. And so therefore, your homework is to read Bhagavad Gita 9th chapter, text 2, which is a long purport. And in that, Prabhupada says that among the principal philosophers in India are Gautama, Kanada, Kapila, Yajnavalkya, Sandilya, and Vaishvanara. And finally, there's Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra. So there is no dearth of knowledge in the field of philosophy or transcendental knowledge. This is not even going to Western philosophers. These are all philosophers from ancient Vedic culture. So there's no dearth, meaning lack, D-E-A-R-T-H, dearth means lack of knowledge in the field of philosophy or transcendental knowledge. Now the Lord says that this 9th chapter is the king of all such knowledge, the essence of all knowledge that can be derived from the study of the Vedas and different kinds of philosophy. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body. And the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service. So now you can see whatever knowledge you're getting in schools, it's not really a high grade of knowledge. In fact, most of it is just speculation. It's not even knowledge. It doesn't even come up to the level of knowledge. And some of it is technical things, but even the technical things are incomplete because they're always correcting their theories and so forth. So why should we limit ourselves to such imperfect knowledge? That's the question. We should learn by this study of the theory of knowledge what is the best knowledge and how to recognize something touted as knowledge but is actually ignorance. Unless we know these things, we'll never really get a good education. So, therefore, Prabhupada writes, now the Lord says that in this 9th chapter is the king of all such knowledge, the essence of all knowledge that can be derived from the study of the Vedas and different kinds of philosophy. It is the most confidential. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body, and the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service. Generally, people are not educated in this confidential knowledge. They are educated in external knowledge, right? Only material phenomena, nothing numinous, only material phenomena. As far as ordinary education is concerned, people are involved with so many departments: politics, sociology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, etc. There are so many departments of knowledge all over the world and many huge universities, but there is, unfortunately, no university or educational institution where the science of the spirit soul is instructed. Yet, the soul is the most important part of the body. Without the presence of the soul, the body has no value. Still, people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul. So you see, Prabhupada has summarized this very nicely. And so whatever education you're getting in schools, it's just external knowledge or mundane knowledge. It is not exceptional in any way. It only begins to be confidential knowledge when you begin with understanding the difference between the body and the soul. Almost 98% of the people in the world never get to that point. They don't understand the difference between the body and the soul. They identify the body or the mind as the soul. The Buddhists don't believe in the existence of the soul. They believe only the existence of the mind. You see? So you see how all pervasive this mundane knowledge is. And unless we know the difference between mundane knowledge and transcendental knowledge, we'll never really get an education. We're just misled by misinformation, half information, or no information. So then Prabhupada says, so in other words, people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul. The Bhagavad Gita, especially from the second chapter on, stresses the importance of the soul. In the very beginning, the Lord says that this body is perishable and that the soul is not perishable. Perishable meaning it can deteriorate and die. Antavanta ime deha nityas yokta saririna. Well, that's second chapter, 18th verse. That is a confidential part of knowledge. Simply knowing that the spirit soul is different from this body and that its nature is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. In other words, immutable, it means it never changes. You should learn this word, I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E. Indestructible means you can never destroy it. The suffix in this word means not. Jai Shishirada Nilamadava Ki Jai. And eternal, meaning has no beginning and no end. Prabhupada then says, but that gives no positive information about the soul. Well, when you say something is immutable, indestructible, those are negative things, not subject to change and not able to destroy it. But when you say eternal, that means that it has no beginning and no end. But that gives no positive information about the soul. Yeah, that's just general information. And two of those words are negations. Sometimes people are under the impression that soul is different from the body, and that when the body is finished or one is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal, but actually that is not the fact. Well, that's the impersonalist philosophy, either Buddhism or Mayavadism. Therefore, Prabhupada's one of his pranam mantras is Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine. So this Nirvisesa and Sunyavad. So Nirvisesa is referring to Mayavadis, and Sunyavada is referring to the Buddhists. And Prabhupada came to the West to defeat the Mayavad philosophy and the Buddhist philosophy, because that's what's misleading people, to think there's nothing beyond some impersonal meditation on energy, or impersonal meditation on nothingness. So Prabhupada says, sometimes people are under the impression that the soul is different from the body, and that when the body is finished or one is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal. But actually, that is not the fact. That's the whole point. How can the soul, which is so active within the body, be inactive after being liberated from the body? See, that's what you call a contradiction. The soul is so active in the material body. How is it going to become inactive after being freed from the body? It should be even more active, with less limitations on activity. That's what liberation is. The soul, however, is always active. If it is eternal, then it is eternally active. And its activities in the spiritual kingdom are the most confidential part of spiritual knowledge. These activities of the spirit soul are therefore indicated here as constituting the king of all knowledge, the most confidential part of all knowledge. Well, you don't realize this unless you actually engage in devotional service. Devotional service is much more enjoyable than just meditating alone in some room or in a cave. And it's full of variety. And it's full of nice tastes and nice sounds and nice philosophy. And it's all based on Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the source of all knowledge and the source of all beauty, etc., the source of everything. So, these activities of the spirit soul are therefore indicated here as constituting the king of all knowledge, the most confidential part of all knowledge. So, the activity of the soul after liberation and its relationships, primarily with Krishna and Krishna's eternally liberated devotees in the spiritual world, is the most confidential knowledge. This knowledge is the purest form of all activities as explained in Vedic literature. So what's interesting, what's going on in the Christian heaven? People don't know that much. There's some idea in the Revelation of St. John, the last book of the Bible. And that's about it. And there's not much in the Quran, there's not much in the Torah. However, there's a plethora, P-L-E-T-H-O-R-A. Plethora means very much knowledge in the Vedas about the spiritual world. Rather, either Vaikuntha or Dwarka or Vrindavan. This knowledge in the purest form of all activities, as explained in this knowledge is the purest form of all activities, as explained in the Vedic literature. So, if you follow the Srimad Bhagvatam class early in the morning, it's beginning at 6:15. If you're not following it, you don't have to be up at 6:15. Let's say you wake up 11 o'clock in the morning. You can still see it on what? On YouTube or Facebook or our webpage also? Or the webpage links to Facebook? Huh? Yeah, you go to our webpage and I'll give you a link to either Facebook or YouTube. So the chapter that we're reading is Krishna's departure for Dwarka and his entrance into, Krishna's entrance into Dwarka after leaving Hastinapur and returning to Dwarka. Well, what we're hearing is just absolutely amazing, wonderful explanations of what goes on in the spiritual world. And you should read this, or at least listen to the questions. I mean, the lectures. It's just astounding what's being explained here. And your homework was to read that verse by Rupa Goswami. So that's First Canto, chapter 11, verse number 26. And that's just an amazing, informative prayer of Sanatana Goswami to Lord Krishna. And it describes the beauty and nectar of the spiritual kingdom of Goloka. So there's no dearth, D-E-A-R-T-H, no dearth or no lack of knowledge about the spiritual world. Whereas you go to these other scriptures, there's very, very little. And even what it's there is not really revealing a lot. It's something, but not much. Because they don't know. They don't know. So how come in Srimad Bhagvatam we have all this, page after page after page of knowledge of what's going on in the spiritual world? Because Vyasadeva is an incarnation of Krishna. So Krishna knows what's going on in the spiritual world, and no one else can explain it as good as Krishna himself. Okay, so then continuing on, in the Padma Purana, man's sinful activities have been analyzed and are shown to be the results of sin after sin. Those who are engaged in fruitive activities are entangled in different stages and forms of sinful reactions. For instance, when the seed of a particular tree is sown, the tree does not appear immediately to grow. It takes some time. It is first a small sprouting plant. Then it assumes the form of a tree. Then it flowers and bears fruit. And when it is complete, the flowers and fruits are enjoyed by persons who have sown the seeds of the tree. Similarly, a man performs a sinful act, and like a seed, it takes time to fructify. There are different stages. The sinful action may have already stopped within the individual, but the results or the fruit of that sinful action are still to be enjoyed. There are sins which are still in the form of a seed, and there are others which are already fructified and are giving us fruit which we are enjoying as distress or pain. Okay, so this is an explanation of the process of reincarnation under the influence of the laws of karma. This is knowledge. We should know what is sin and what are sinful reactions. If we assume that there's no such thing as sin, just like nowadays, things that are sinful are redefined as normal. That's called a change of culture. This change of culture has been taking place for a long time. It's just accelerated today. So what was considered a sin now is sometimes glorified as something wonderful and edifying for a normal human being. Edifying means it educates you. Well, the mundane philosophies touted by Marx and Freud and Darwin and a lot of other people is misleading. It leads people to sense gratification and committing one sin after another and being entangled hopelessly in the cycle of birth and death. So beware of anyone who redefines a sin to be normal activity or glorifies the sin as something wonderful. This is what is happening on a large scale today. And most people are just going along with it because they have no knowledge. As explained in the 28th verse of the 7th chapter, a person who has completely ended the reactions of all sinful activities and who is fully engaged in pious activities, being freed from the duality of this material world, becomes engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna. In other words, those who are actually engaged in the devotional service to the Supreme Lord are already freed from all reactions. So, first you state the problem, then you state the solution. Usually, materialistic writers, they state the problem very nicely, but they have no solution for it. Otherwise, you just sort of tolerate it. That's not knowledge. Knowledge, real knowledge, can state where the problem is, and it also states what the solution is. So that's what Prabhupada has done here now. He states the problem of why people suffer. It's because of one sin after another, and those sins are sort of glorified as not being sins, so more and more people do them, and then whenever you sin, there's going to be fruits that are born from it. You sow a seed, and it eventually will grow up and flower and then give fruits. So the same thing is here when we start engaging in sins because of ignorance or willfully. There are reactions that take place, and we become entangled in the laws of karma and repeated birth, death, old age, and disease. But in chapter 7, verse 28, a person who has completely ended the reactions of all sinful activities and who is fully engaged in pious activities, being freed from the duality of this material world, becomes engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is 7th chapter, 28th verse. Yesam twantagatam papam jananam punyakarmanam tehidvandva mohanir mukta bhajanti mam jyotirvataha. So what are the points in this verse? It says, 1, they've ended the reactions of all sinful activities. How do you do that? By engaging under the influence, under the teachings of a bona fide guru. You engage in devotional service. Every action you take is an act of devotion to Krishna, with the fruit of that action being offered to Krishna. So that's how you become freed from all sinful activities, by being fully engaged in Krishna consciousness. And then one becomes freed from the duality of this material world. That means you're no longer confused to make a decision. Should I live in India? Should I live in America? Should I work for this company or that company? Should I marry this person or that person? Should I give everything up and live in a cave to avoid suffering, or should I continue working and suffer? All these questions are no longer cause any perplexity or confusion. Why? Because one has a singular goal in life, and that is to please Krishna. So there's no more duality if you have that singular goal in life. And you have the help of Siksha and Diksha gurus in case you get confused. You say, well, I know what my singular goal is, but I'm not sure how to achieve it because there's this issue and there's that issue. So what do I do? Well, you'll get advice from bona fide advanced devotees, even though you yourself may not be able to see what the answer is. What is the answer always? Whatever is most favorable for Krishna consciousness. Yes. So therefore, in the 16th chapter, Anukulyena Sankalpa Pratikulyena Varjanam. So that's a very important verse from the, I think Rupa Goswami has written it, 18th chapter, 65th verse in the purport. And Prabhupada explains this. I'm sorry, 66th verse. Pratikulyena Varjanam Raksisya Titi Vishvaso Goptritve Varanam Tata Atmaniksepakarpanya Sadvida Priti Lakshanam Sadvida Saranagati. So it says, 1, accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness. Anukulyena Sankalpa. Pratikulyena Varjana, reject everything unfavorable. So, and then Raksisya Titi Vishvaso, and accept only Krishna as your protector, Goptritve Varanam Tata, and Krishna as your only maintainer. Don't depend on the mercy of others. Just depend on the mercy of Krishna. And then Atmanik Sepakarpanye. Whatever happens, accept it as the mercy of the Lord, and always remain humble and meek in the execution of devotional service. So these are 6 signs of surrender, or it's the process of surrender. So if you follow these 6 things, especially the first 2, accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness, reject everything unfavorable, you'll never be confused about making a decision. And if you are confused, then ask Siksha or Diksha Guru, and they'll answer the question for you. So, one is ended all reactions to sinful activities because they're engaged fully in Krishna conscious activities. And this frees you from the duality of the material world. There you go. You're in a safe position now, under the protection of Krishna. And then it says, in other words, those who are actually engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord are already freed from all reactions. This statement is confirmed in the Padma Purana. Aparabdha phalam papam, kutam bijam phalon mukam, kramen aiva praliyate, Vishnu Bhakti Ratat Manam. So what is this verse? This is from the Padma Purana. For those who are engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all sinful reactions, whether fructified in the stock or in the form of a seed, gradually vanish. So, fructified in stock or in the form of a seed. So those are, fructified means the fruit of, so that's when you have, a congenital disease, or you have financial problems, or you're ugly, or you have congenital disease means you're born with the disease, or maybe ugly, maybe poor. So these are fructified reactions, and then in the stock, that means that they haven't started yet, or they're just starting, and you're getting you have a hint that something's going to happen, or in the form of a seed. Well, the seed means it's going to fructify at some point. But seeds can be buried in the ground. You can't see them, right? Okay, so, and then the last thing, the fourth thing that's not mentioned here is, after everything is said and done, you have what's called the tendency to be attracted to sinful activity, which takes you into the next life to restart this process, where you have the seeds beginning to sprout, and then you have the fruit, and after all is done, you have the tendency to be attracted to sinful activity that takes you to the next life. So all these different aspects of karma gradually vanish by being fully engaged in devotional service. Therefore, the purifying process of devotional service is very strong, and it is called Pavitram Uttamam, the purest of the pure. Uttama means transcendental, tamas means this material world of darkness, and uttama means that which is transcendental to material activities and to material ignorance. Devotional activities are never to be considered material, although sometimes it appears that devotees are engaged just like ordinary men. One who can see and is familiar with devotional service will know that they are not material activities. They are all spiritual and devotional, uncontaminated by the material modes of nature. So if you're following the regulative principles and you're engaged in unwavering devotional service, you achieve a transcendental position, and you're on a fast path to purifying yourself completely and going back to Godhead. Okay. So far Prabhupada has explained there's knowledge, there's confidential knowledge, and there's most confidential knowledge, and then he explains what is knowledge. Knowledge is basically mundane knowledge, that can take you up to the point of Brahman. Then there's confidential knowledge, where you learn the difference between the soul and the body, and you begin to only engage in those activities that are beneficial to the soul in relationship to Krishna and devotional service. And when you make gradual advancement in devotional service, at a certain point you attain this most confidential knowledge, which is full-time, pure devotional service rendered to the Lord. And that is the highest form of knowledge. Knowledge will lead to activity, just like you're studying to be a scientist. Well, what's the end goal of that study? The activity of researching new things in science, or making things based on scientific knowledge that you have. It leads to activity. And so knowledge always leads to some kind of activity. So then Prabhupada says, it is said that the execution of devotional service is so perfect that one can perceive the results directly. This direct result is actually perceived, and we have practical experience, that any person who is chanting the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, in course of chanting without offenses, feels some transcendental pleasure and very quickly becomes purified of all material contamination. So there's a caveat here. Caveat, basically, it's like a warning. And it says, any person who's chanting the holy names of Krishna, in course of chanting without offenses, feels some transcendental pleasure. So if you're chanting with offenses, you will not feel this transcendental pleasure. And you will not become very quickly purified of all material contamination. However, if you chant without committing the offenses, so there are different categories of offenses. There's Nam Aparad, there's offenses to the holy name that we recite every morning. There is Vaishnava Aparad, and there's Dham Aparad. Let's say you go to Vrindavan and you sit down with some of the so-called sadhus to smoke marijuana. That would be Dham Aparad. That would be committing offense against the holy Dham. And Vaishnava Aparad is offenses against pure Vaishnavas. And Nama Aparad is 10 offenses against the holy name. So if you avoid these offenses, especially the offenses against the holy name, and chant Hare Krishna, you make very quick advancement. You'll feel transcendental pleasure right away, and you become purified of all material contamination. This is knowledge. Just like if you mix sodium bicarbonate, carbonate, and an acid, you'll get a release of a gas, you get a bubbling, and this thing will happen, that thing will happen. So in the same way, if you chant without committing offenses, and there's 10 offenses to the holy name, there's offenses against holy Dham, there's offenses against holy persons, what happens? You make gradual and steady advancement in spiritual life, and you feel transcendental pleasure right away, and it keeps increasing. Prabhupada says this is actually seen. Furthermore, if one engages not only in hearing, but in trying to broadcast the message of devotional activities as well, or if he engages himself in helping the missionary activities of Krishna consciousness, he gradually feels spiritual progress. So you want to become a preacher, you'll make spiritual progress. This advancement in spiritual life does not depend on any kind of previous education or qualification. The method itself is so pure that by simply engaging in it, one becomes pure. So basically he's saying you don't have to be initiated in order to start the spiritual process. And you don't have to have any special education or qualification. You might be able to read, you might not be able to read, you might be able to write, you might not be able to write. As long as you can chant and hear, you can make tangible devotional progress by chanting Hare Krishna and associating with devotees. Okay, so this is a wonderful purport. There's a lot of information here. The next part of this purport goes into an explanation of Narada Muni, because Narada Muni was a boy born in a very poor family, didn't have a father, just had a mother, and he never was formally educated, like in schools, where they teach mundane knowledge. And he was only educated by pure devotees, and that was for a short period of time, 4 months. And he became the greatest sage in the history of the world. And he didn't have any formal education, but he was educated in Krishna consciousness. And he always chants Hare Krishna. He has given up all sins, therefore his body is very light. He can fly through the air to anywhere he wants in the whole spiritual and material worlds. So, Prabhupada, why does he include Narada Muni in this explanation of the verse of Raja Vidya, or the king of all knowledge, or in the perfection of the theory of knowledge? Because he shows that mundane education will not give you this result. Only Krishna conscious education will give you this result that Narada Muni attained. And his result is the highest pinnacle of success. The highest pinnacle of success. It's not like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or any of these rich people and powerful people. You go in the opposite direction in Krishna consciousness. You become more humble, more meek, and even though you might receive tremendous amount of wealth, just like Prabhupada received tremendous amount of wealth, he did not keep it for himself. He used it to glorify Krishna. So you're not, in material life, people are building wealth. So you have President Trump, he's very rich, he's a billionaire. And against him you had Mr. Schreier, who's a billionaire. He was running for a Democratic nomination to be president. And you have Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire. He's one of the top 5 or 10 richest people in the world. And he's running against Trump. He wanted to be elected president. So what are people trying to do in material life with material education? Is to become wealthy, to build up wealth, and along with that prestige and properties and cars and businesses and so forth. But what is a devotee trying to do in the activity of Krishna consciousness? To build up character. There's a difference between building character. Trump is always criticized by people of his party and people of other parties as being a brash and often, let's say, abusive, insulting, blah, blah, blah. They use all these words. And rightfully so in many ways. So you don't have to build up character if you're trying to build up a lot of wealth. In fact, most of the time, in order to build up a huge amount of wealth, you have to cheat, you have to lie, you have to coerce, you have to bribe, and so many things people do to become so rich. And you have to exploit, above all. You have to be an exploiter. So, no, in Krishna consciousness, you build character. In material life, you build wealth and power. Okay, so read this whole purport. It's about, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and explain in more depth the theory of knowledge. Now, you've already written maybe 2-3 times on the theory of knowledge. You have to now add more information. Just like there is knowledge, there's confidential knowledge, and there's most confidential knowledge. Also, if you read the introduction to Ishopanishad, it explains in depth a lot of information about epistemology. Now, what is epistemology? Jai Shishirada Nilamadava Kijay. Epistemology is the part of philosophy that explains how you know something, and if it's true or false, or how do you know. So, for example, we've studied this before, but now is your chance to include some of this, because there are 4 major sections, according to ancient Greek philosophy. Let's see. So, there's what you call one second, I'll have to find it. So philosophy was used to make sense out of the world in a non-religious way. This is the Greeks. It dealt with a wide variety of subjects, including astronomy, mathematics, political philosophy, ethics, metaphysics, ontology, logic, biology, rhetoric, aesthetics. So these are different divisions of knowledge according to the Greeks. Let me see, one second. Actually, there's 4. They break it down to 4 major divisions usually, and that is logic, ontology, ethics, and aesthetics, if I'm not mistaken. We can double check this. So if you say, so you have, look these words up. You have logic, ethics, ontology, aesthetics. Logic, ontology, ethics, aesthetics. Look those 4 words up and see what they mean. And so here, this is what we're in the introduction of Ishopanishad is all about epistemology. Epistemology is how do you know if something is true or false? Or how do you know something? Well, there's epistemology that you could study in a college course, and there's epistemology, Vedic epistemology, as Srila Prabhupada explains it. So this is important because how do you know if something is true or false? You have to be able to understand that. And when we studied that verse in the second canto, 9th chapter, I think it was 33rd or 34th verse, it says that, anything that is not in relationship to Krishna is an illusion. Right? So, but that's one aspect of epistemology. But rather, epistemology, as Prabhupada is explaining it here in Introduction to Each Upanishad, and we've studied this before, he defines the 4 defects, right? So there's, we make mistakes, we're easily illusioned, we have imperfect senses, and we have a cheating propensity. Okay. And then he talks about he says the Vedas are not compilations of human knowledge. Vedic knowledge comes from the spiritual world, from Lord Krishna. Another name for the Vedas is Shruti. Shruti refers to that knowledge which is acquired by hearing. It is not experimental knowledge. So therefore, there is Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Sabda, 3 major ways of acquiring knowledge. So Sabda means you hear from a perfect source. That's what we do. Pratyaksha is what the scientists do. Pratyaksha and Anumana, both of those are somewhat scientific methods. Pratyaksha is direct observation. Anumana is indirect observation, or what you would call inference. So we, in Krishna consciousness, we depend on Sabda Pramana, the evidence given by perfect authorities, such as Vyasadeva and Lord Chaitanya and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Padma Purana and so forth. Okay. And then it talks about there's an ascending process and a descending process, Avaroha Panta and Aroha Panta. So the ascending process is a scientific method, and it always leads to imperfect knowledge. The descending process is Krishna conscious method, where we accept knowledge from perfect source. The most perfect source is Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna's pure devotees in the Srimad Bhagvatam. And then we also, it also explains, so those are some of the main points. You can read this introduction just to refresh your mind. So now, what you're going to add to your theory of knowledge project is there's knowledge, there's confidential knowledge, and there's most confidential knowledge. And then there is 3 kinds of evidence: Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Sabda. And then there's Shruti. And then Prabhupada explains there's 2 systems of knowledge. What are those systems? One is the ascending process, and the other is the descending process. And then, so there's a long explanation of that. So we want to add that to your essay on the theory of knowledge. And then also, let's see if there's anything else. No, okay. So, Another aspect is what Shrestha said, that jnana is accepting the statements of the Vedas, and vijnana is realizing the truth of those statements through practical experience of devotional service. So that is the overriding definition or explanation of the theory of knowledge, according to our, or Krishna conscious point of view. All right, then so I want you to read these things, this Bhagavad Gita 9.2 and Introduction to Ishopanishad, and add on to your Vedic, to your theory of knowledge essay. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email, and I'll give you suggestions. What you're doing now is writing a thesis. We started with the analogy of the cave, and then Bhagavad Gita, the inverted banyan tree, and so forth. And we've discussed a lot of things about the theory of knowledge. Now I want you to summarize all these different things and add on to it what we discussed today, and then ask for suggestions from me on how to improve your essay, how to improve your paper. Okay? And so this is like something you would do in college. But unless you focus on this subject, you'll study it for a week or two, and then you go on. And then we go on to another subject, and then after some time, you realize that you forgot most of it. But if you write this essay and work on it, you're not going to forget it, And then you're going to actually teach it also. So we'll keep working on this. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email, and I'll answer them. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Any questions?
What is the difference between even the Shruti, Nana, Smriti, Pramanas, and the Yaksha, Shabda, and the Nuna?
Okay, there's a question. What is the difference between Shruti, Smriti, Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Sabda? Well, Shruti means it's the process of learning. You learn by hearing bona fide statements of the Vedas. Okay, Veda is Shruti. It's spoken by perfect authorities. That's what it means. It's knowledge that's spoken by perfect authorities. And then Smriti is knowledge spoken by Shruti is basically what's spoken, what's learned by hearing. Smriti is spoken, and Shruti is usually what is spoken by Krishna. Smriti is what is spoken by pure devotees of Krishna. And both are not experimental knowledge. Both are perfect knowledge. So then Pratyaksha and Anumana are two methods used by mundane people to try and understand things. So Pratyaksha is by direct evidence, or direct meaning by observation, and Anumana is by indirect observation or inference. And both of those are imperfect ways of knowing things. And sabda is hearing from perfect authorities, whether Shruti or Smriti.
He said N-A-N-A, but I think he wants the J-Y-N-A.
Jyana, Jnana.
Yeah, he also wants to know more about that.
Well, Jnana, as it was defined in the Srimad Bhagvatam, first canto, 5th chapter, verse 30, Prabhupada says, Jnanam means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge. So, and you can only achieve Brahman realization by such knowledge. So Jnana would be the whole body of mundane knowledge. And then it says any kind of knowledge. So the whole body of mundane knowledge, as well as let's just say the whole body of mundane knowledge. That's one definition of jnanam. However, we know from the 9th chapter, 2nd verse, in the purport, that there's knowledge, confidential knowledge, and most confidential knowledge. So jnanam, so therefore when it says jnana means ordinary knowledge or any branch of knowledge, well, any branch of knowledge would also include knowledge, confidential knowledge, and most confidential knowledge. Okay? But if you just deal with regular knowledge based on pratyaksha and anumana, the most you could attain would be impersonal Brahman, and you'll fall down eventually. It's only when you get to confidential knowledge, knowing the difference between the body and the soul, and start learning about devotional service, that you could go beyond Brahman realization. But the most confidential knowledge is Krishna consciousness, pure love for Krishna, and through devotional service. Okay?
Someone would like to repeat 6 steps of surrender and 40 steps.
Okay, well, the 6 steps of surrender. Anukulyena sankalpa, pratikulyena varjanam, gotritve, gotritve vishvaso, atman, and then Raksisyaititi, I'm sorry, Raksisyaititi vishvaso gopritve varanam tata atmaniksepa karpanye. So that is, accept everything favorable for devotional service, anukulyena. Reject everything unfavorable, pratikulyena. And accept Krishna as your sole protector, Raksisyaititi. And accept Krishna as your only maintainer, Gopritve Varanam Tata. And whatever happens, accept it as the mercy of Krishna, and then always remain humble and meek in the execution of devotional service. Those are the 6 processes of surrender to the Lord. Okay. Now, if you use the first 2, accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness, reject everything unfavorable, you'll be and follow strictly Krishna consciousness, you become free of duality. The duality is what confuses people. You only make decisions that are favorable to Krishna consciousness and reject anything else. Whereas now, we're trying to make decisions like what is better, the top of the stool that's dry or the bottom of the stool that's wet. Well, you can't offer a stool to Krishna, so that's not a, you don't have to differentiate between the top or the bottom because they're both stool, right? Should I live in America? Should I live in India? Should I do this? Should I do that? You become free of that duality. You'll do only those things that are favorable to Krishna consciousness. And then what was the second question? Well, the four defects are: we make mistakes, we're easily illusioned, our senses are imperfect, and we have a cheating propensity. Okay?
That's all the questions we seem to have.
Okay, Hare Krishna.